I'm Amber, 28, and still reeling from the family dinner that shattered everything I thought I knew. After 3 years away, I returned home for Dad's birthday. The words that left my mouth changed our family forever, exposing decades of secrets better left buried. Where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments, hit subscribe, and settle in for my story about how family secrets and betrayal brought me to the breaking point where I finally found my voice. Growing up in Mapleton was my hero growing up. A high school history teacher with kind eyes and a quiet wisdom, he encouraged my dreams from the moment I could articulate them. Amber, he'd say, his hand on my shoulder. Never let anyone tell you what your limits are. When I wanted to enter the statewide essay contest in 8th grade, Dad stayed up late helping me polish my arguments. When I got interested in photography during sophomore year, he converted our basement storage closet into a darkroom, learning alongside me how to develop film. Then there was my mother, Brenda. Nothing I accomplished ever seemed good enough. A 96 on a test would prompt questions about the 4 points lost rather than celebration of what I'd achieved. Maybe pull your hair back from your face, she'd say before family photos. Amber, that college is so far away. Are you sure you want to apply there? Amber. He was the golden child who could do no wrong in our mother's eyes. His B- grades were celebrated. His sloppy room was just a phase. His decision to attend the local community college while living at home was sensible and mature. I love my brother, but the disparity in treatment was impossible to ignore. When acceptance letters came during my senior year, I chose the school farthest from home, University of California. You won't know anyone there. The culture is so different. Dad had simply said, "We'll miss you terribly, but you need to follow your path." College became my escape. I thrived in the environment where no one had preconceived notions about who I was or what I could achieve. I made the dean's list consistently. I found lifelong friends who accepted me without reservation. I secured competitive internships that eventually led to my current position as a digital marketing strategist at a tech firm in San Francisco. With each passing semester, I was making excuses to skip holidays. By my second year working in San Francisco, I was down to a brief Christmas visit. And then, 3 years ago, Dad and I maintained our relationship through phone calls and the occasional weekend visit when he could make the trip to California. Tyler and I texted regularly, and he'd visited twice. And we're planning a surprise dinner. The whole family will be there. Aunt Judy and Uncle Frank are coming in from Denver, and the cousins too. It would mean a lot to Dad if you came. I closed my eyes, already feeling the familiar knot of tension forming. I don't know, Ty. Work is crazy right now, and please, Amber. He rarely interrupted me. Dad misses you like crazy. And it's his 60th. It's important. I thought about my father, his encouraging smile, the way he'd championed my dreams even when they took me far from him. Okay, I finally said. I'll be there. The flight into Des Moines felt like a journey backward in time. I rented a car for the hour-long drive to Mapleton. Then the Welcome to Mapleton sign with its population count that hadn't changed in decades. Main Street looked almost exactly as I remembered it, Hal's Hardware, Patty's Diner. A nod to changing times even in this unchanging place. Pulling into the driveway of my childhood home, I sat for a moment, gathering courage. The house needed painting, I noticed. The flower beds that Mom had once tended so meticulously looked somewhat neglected. Had things changed, or was I just seeing with fresh eyes? Mom answered the door before I could knock. She'd aged more than I expected, her blonde hair now mostly gray, new lines framing her mouth and eyes. For a brief moment, something like joy flashed across her face before her expression settled into its familiar mask of appraisal. Amber, you made it. Not quite a welcome, but not a rejection either. She stepped back to let me enter. You've lost weight. Are you eating properly out there? And just like that, we were back to our usual dynamic. Tyler bounded down the stairs, wrapping me in a bear hug that lifted me off my feet. At 25, he'd filled out his formerly lanky frame, looking more like Dad than ever. You came, he said, as if he doubted me despite my promise. I said I would, I replied, squeezing him back. Where's Dad? Fishing with Uncle Frank. They think the party is tomorrow. So we've got them out of the house while we set up. They'll be back around 5. He grabbed my suitcase. Come on, your room's all ready. My childhood bedroom had been preserved like a museum exhibit. Cheerleading trophies still lined the bookshelf. Photos from high school still adorned the bulletin board. And my collection of photography books remained stacked neatly on the desk. The only change was the fresh bedding, which smelled of the same laundry detergent Mom had always used. I sat on the edge of the bed, running my fingers over the familiar quilt pattern, wondering if coming home had been a mistake after all. After unpacking, I found Mom in the kitchen, methodically chopping vegetables for Dad's birthday dinner. The rhythmic sound of the knife against the cutting board was punctuated by the occasional direction, Amber. The good china is on the top shelf, or make sure the water glasses are spotless. I fell easily into the role of assistant, following instructions without comment to keep the peace, where we could talk without Mom's hovering presence. The sawdust smell and the organized chaos of his workbench brought an immediate comfort. I was examining his newest project, a chess table with intricate inlay work, when I heard the side door open. I thought I might find you here. Dad stood in the doorway, his fishing hat still on, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. Dad. I rushed to hug him, breathing in his familiar scent of aftershave and fresh air. You're early. And you're supposed to be surprised tomorrow. Studying my face. It's so good to see you, sweetheart. Something in his expression gave me pause. Behind the joy was a weariness I hadn't noticed in our video calls. Everything okay, Dad? It's for your cousin Brian's wedding gift. It's beautiful. The inlay must have taken forever. Keeps me busy. He picked up a sanding block, his movements automatic, his focus seemingly on the wood beneath his hands. I'm proud of you, Amber. Always have been. We talked about my job, his upcoming retirement, Tyler's new position at the local bank. Our catch-up was interrupted by raised voices from inside the house. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Mom was upset about something. Dad's shoulders tensed. But the garage door swung open. Nathan, you're supposed to be fishing until 5, Mom said, her voice tight. And Amber, I need help with the table settings. As we followed her inside, I heard her mutter to Dad, we agreed to wait. This isn't the time. The time for what? I asked, but Mom was already striding ahead, listing tasks that needed completion before guests arrived. The next couple of hours passed in a flurry of preparation. Aunt Judy and Uncle Frank arrived first, followed by their children, my cousins Melissa and Brian, both with their spouses. Tyler's girlfriend Katie came shortly after. The house filled with the comfortable noise of family gathering, laughter, overlapping conversations, the clinking of ice in glasses. Throughout it all, I noticed the strange undercurrents. Aunt Judy kept giving me long, searching looks when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Uncle Frank seemed unusually subdued, nursing his single beer for hours. Dad moved through the rooms like a ghost, present but somehow absent at the same time. And Mom was in overdrive, her hosting persona turned up to 11, laughing too loudly, touching people's arms too frequently, refilling drinks before they were half empty. I'd seen this version of her before, but never quite so amplified. By the time we all sat down for dinner, the tension in the room was palpable. I was seated between Tyler and cousin Brian, with Mom and Dad at opposite ends of the table. The formal dining room, used only for special occasions, felt both familiar and foreign after so many years away. So, Amber, Uncle Frank said as Mom served the salad course, San Francisco treating you well? Must be quite different from Mapleton. It is, I agreed, but I love it. The energy, the innovation, there's always something happening. Mom made a small noise that might have been agreement or disapproval. Your latest project, the social media campaign for that startup, it went viral, right? Tyler jumped in, clearly trying to steer the conversation to safer ground. Didn't you say it got like 1 million views or something? 1.2 million in the first week, I said, grateful for his intervention. The client was thrilled. That's our Amber, Dad said, raising his glass slightly, always exceeding expectations. Mom set down her fork with a little too much force. Not always returning phone calls, though. That she couldn't make it home for Christmas 2 years running? That's she. Brenda, Dad interrupted. This is supposed to be a celebration. Mom smiled tightly. Of course. I'm simply making conversation. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Aunt Judy quickly launched into a story about her garden club's latest drama, while Uncle Frank became intensely interested in his mashed potatoes. Tyler kept shooting me apologetic glances. I pushed food around my plate, appetite gone. The real world going on while I was trapped in this time capsule of family dysfunction. As the main course was served, I noticed Dad had barely touched his food. His 60th birthday dinner. And he looked miserable. Something was definitely wrong beyond the usual family tensions. Mom, meanwhile, had shifted to interrogating Tyler and Katie about their relationship timeline. You've been together 2 years now. Any thoughts about making things official? Katie blushed, while Tyler looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. Mom, they'll figure that out on their own, I said, unable to stay silent in the face of my brother's discomfort. Oh? You're an expert on relationships now. Mom's eyebrows rose. Family doesn't need privacy, Mom countered. Family shares everything. At least, that's how it works when family is actually present in each other's lives. The barb landed exactly as intended. I gripped my napkin under the table, feeling 13 again, never good enough, never meeting the standard. Tyler was frantically texting under the table, probably sending me apologetic messages I couldn't check. Dad cleared his throat, but said nothing to defuse the situation. Aunt Judy looked like she might cry. Speaking of sharing, Uncle Frank said suddenly, his voice unnaturally loud, remember that family vacation to Lake Okoboji when the kids were little? Must have been, 25 years ago now? Mom's head snapped toward him. Frank, nobody wants to rehash ancient history. I don't know, Aunt Judy said, her voice tentative. Those are sweet memories. Amber was just learning to swim. Remember? Laura had her in those little water wings. The silence that followed was absolute. I frowned, trying to place the name. Who's Laura? I asked. Mom stood abruptly. Who wants dessert? I made Nathan's favorite chocolate cake. Dad pushed his chair back with a scrape that made everyone jump. Excuse me, he mumbled, then walked quickly from the dining room. The weight of whatever was happening pressed down on the table like a physical presence. I looked around at the suddenly averted eyes and tense postures. What's going on? I demanded. Who's Laura? Nobody, Mom said firmly. A family friend from years ago. Frank more wine. I stood up. I'm going to check on Dad. Sit down, Amber. He's fine. Just getting old. Mom's voice had a warning edge I recognized from childhood, the tone that brooked no argument. I ignored it and followed my father. I found Dad in the hallway bathroom. I'm sorry about dinner. Your mother is. He trailed off, sighing. Being herself, I finished for him. But this feels like more than that. What's going on? Who's Laura? Everything I've done, everything we've done, was because we thought it was best. A chill ran through me. What are you talking about? You're scaring me. He turned to face me directly, opening his mouth to respond when Tyler appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of panic. Mom is asking for both of you, he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. Like, right now. She's about to serve the cake and says everyone needs to be there. Dad's expression shuddered. We'll be right there, he said, suddenly sounding every bit his 60 years. Tyler grabbed my arm as Dad moved past us. What were you guys talking about? He whispered. I have no idea, I replied. But something weird is definitely going on. Do you know who Laura is? His eyes widened fractionally before he controlled his expression. We should get back, he said, avoiding my question. When we returned to the dining room, everyone else remained seated, the forced smiles on their faces painful to witness. There you are, Mom said, her cheerfulness so brittle it could shatter. We can't celebrate without the birthday boy and his daughter. Dad took his seat without comment. I remained standing. What's happening right now? I asked, looking around the table. We're celebrating your father's birthday. No, we're not. Dad looks miserable. Everyone's acting strange. Aunt Judy mentioned someone named Laura, and the whole room froze. I want to know what's going on. Mom's smile disappeared. This is not the time or place for your dramatics. Dramatics? I'm asking a simple question about why my family is acting like we're at a funeral instead of a birthday party. Your family. Mom laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. The family you've barely acknowledged for 3 years? The family whose calls you don't return? The family you couldn't be bothered to visit for holidays? That's not fair, I countered, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. I've stayed away because every time I come home, you make me feel like a failure. Nothing I do is ever good enough for you. Nothing I achieve matters. Oh, she snapped, then turned back to me. You have no idea what I've sacrificed for you. What this family has sacrificed. Sacrificed? What are you talking about? You've spent my entire life making me feel like I was a burden, a disappointment. Like I could never measure up to some impossible standard. Dad finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. Brenda, that's enough. No, Nathan, I don't think it is. Mom's eyes never left my face. You've always encouraged her selfishness. Her ingratitude. Well, she's 28 years old now. Maybe it's time she heard a few home truths. Like what? I challenged. Like why you've never been able to show me the same love you show Tyler. Why nothing I do is ever enough. Why you couldn't even call to congratulate me when I got promoted last year. You want to know why? Mom's voice rose dangerously. Because every time I look at you I see. Brenda. Dad stood now, his chair scraping back. We agreed. Not like this. Agreed on what? I demanded, looking between them. What is happening right now? Uncle Frank cleared his throat. She deserves to know the truth. Mom whirled on him. Shut up, Frank. This isn't your decision to make. Aunt Judy was crying now, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. Mom, Dad, Tyler said. His voice uncharacteristically serious. I found the papers in the attic last year. The adoption certificate. The letters. I felt like the floor was dropping away beneath me. Adoption certificate? What adoption certificate? Dad moved toward me, hands outstretched. Amber, please sit down. This isn't how we wanted to tell you. Tell me what? My voice sounded strange in my own ears, as if coming from far away. We agreed never to tell her, Mom hissed, but it seemed more like she was talking to herself than anyone at the table. Tell me what? I repeated, louder this time. The room fell silent, every eye on me, then Dad. He took a deep breath, shoulders slumping as if in defeat. Amber, there's something about your birth that we never told you. You're not. Mom slammed her hand on the table, making the dishes jump. I said no. She pointed at the door, her entire body trembling. Leave. Get out. This dinner is over. The shocked silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Everyone frozen in this terrible tableau of family secrets about to unravel. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders, and spoke the words that would change everything. Not until I hear the truth I've been denied my entire life. Mom stared at me as if I'd slapped her, her face draining of color. The hand that had been pointing toward the door slowly lowered to her side. Amber, she said, her voice suddenly small. You don't understand what you're asking. Then explain it to me. I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I'm not a child anymore. I deserve to know. The tension in the room was suffocating. Tyler moved to stand beside me, his presence a silent show of support that nearly broke my composure. Dad looked at Mom for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. She's right, Brenda. We can't keep this from her any longer. Mom sank into her chair, all the fight suddenly gone from her. Fine, she whispered. You tell her then. You've always been better at making me the villain anyway. Uncle Frank quietly suggested that he and Aunt Judy take the cousins and their spouses into the living room, but I shook my head. Dad remained standing, his fingers drumming nervously against his thigh. Amber, what we're about to tell you, it's going to be difficult to hear. But I want you to know that everything we did. Hearing the words spoken aloud by my father sent a shock through my system. The room seemed to tilt slightly before righting itself. Who are my biological parents? I managed to ask. Dad glanced at Mom, who sat with her eyes fixed on the tablecloth, then at Aunt Judy, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Your biological mother was my sister, Laura, Dad said. Your aunt. The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to wave away. I struggled to process what I was hearing. Your aunt. I repeated. But I don't. I've never heard of her. You have a sister? Had, Aunt Judy corrected gently. Laura passed away shortly after you were born. I looked around the table, trying to anchor myself in this new reality. I don't understand. Why wouldn't you tell me this? Why keep it a secret that I'm your niece, not your daughter? Dad pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. It's a long story, and not a pretty one. Are you sure you want to hear it all right now? I've waited 28 years, I said. I'm not waiting any longer. He nodded, took a deep breath, and began. 29 years ago. Laura was 16 and the brightest star in our family. Creative, passionate, determined, a lot like you actually. She was in her junior year of high school when she discovered she was pregnant. Concerned about the family's reputation in the community, about Laura's future. They decided she would be sent to stay with relatives in Minnesota until the baby was born, then return to finish school while the baby was placed for adoption. But that's not what happened, I guessed. No. Laura was stubborn. She insisted she wanted to keep her baby. She and our parents fought terribly about it. I was already married to your mother then, teaching at the high school. Laura came to us, begged us to help her convince our parents. Dad's eyes grew distant, lost in the painful memory. Your mother and I had been trying to have a child for 3 years without success. We just started discussing adoption options when Laura's situation developed. Aunt Judy picked up the thread. It was my husband, Frank, who suggested the compromise. I turned to look at Mom, trying to reconcile this information with the woman who had always seemed so distant from me. You agreed to this. Mom finally looked up. Yes. We thought it was the perfect solution. A baby for us, a way for Laura to finish school while still being connected to her child, and the family reputation preserved. Our parents insisted on conditions, Dad added. We would move away from our hometown in Nebraska to somewhere Laura wouldn't be recognized. We would raise you as our biological child, with no mention of adoption. Laura could be part of your life, but only as your aunt, never revealing the truth until you were old enough, though that timeline was deliberately kept vague. So we moved here, I said, putting the pieces together. To Mapleton. Yes. Your mother was pregnant with Tyler by then, a surprise after years of trying, so the timing worked. Everyone assumed we'd moved for my new teaching position and to accommodate our growing family. The room fell silent as I absorbed this information. My entire identity, the narrative of my life, was being rewritten before my eyes. What happened to Laura? I finally asked. You said she died after I was born? Dad and Aunt Judy exchanged a pained look. There were complications during delivery, Aunt Judy explained softly. A hemorrhage that the doctors couldn't control. She held you once before. Her voice broke. And Uncle Frank reached across to squeeze her hand. She named you, he said. Amber Dawn. She said you were as beautiful as the sunrise. I felt tears welling in my eyes. And my biological father? Who is he? The tension in the room shifted again, becoming somehow heavier. His name is Daniel Carson, Dad said after a moment. He was a senior when Laura was a junior. He never knew about the pregnancy. I frowned. Never knew? Laura didn't tell him. She wanted to, Aunt Judy said, shooting a pointed look at my mother. But she was convinced not to. All eyes turned to Mom, who sat rigid in her chair. I was protecting our arrangement, she said defensively. If the boy knew, he might have wanted involvement. Rights. It would have complicated everything. So you stopped her from telling him? I asked, incredulous. I intercepted her letters, Mom admitted. Except my real identity. Tyler, who had been silent through this exchange, finally spoke. I found Laura's diaries and letters in a box in the attic last year. I was looking for Dad's old baseball cards, and there was this locked trunk. The key was taped to the bottom. He looked at our parents, guilt and defiance warring on his face. I read them. All of them. Laura wrote to you every day during her pregnancy, he said, turning to me. She called you Little Bean and told you all about her dreams for your future. And she wrote to Daniel too, letters Mom never sent, telling him about you, asking him to be part of your life if he wanted to be. You had no right to go through those things, Mom snapped. As far as we know. Last I heard, he was living in Missouri, teaching at a university there. My mind was racing, trying to process everything I'd learned in the past few minutes. The mother I'd never known. The father who didn't know about me. The conspiracy of silence that had shaped my entire life. I have so many questions, I said, feeling overwhelmed. What did she look like, Laura? Do I look like her? What was she like as a person? Why did everyone agree to never tell me the truth? You're the spitting image of her, Uncle Frank said gruffly. And her diaries, obviously. We can show you everything, Amber. Answer all your questions. I turned to Mom, who sat silent and stone-faced at the end of the table. Was this why? You have no idea what it was like, she whispered. Raising my husband's niece as my daughter. Watching you grow up looking more like her every day. Knowing that if the truth ever came out, you might. She stopped, unable to continue. Might what? I pressed. Might love her more than me, Mom finished, a tear spilling down her cheek. Even though she was gone. I looked around at the faces of my family, or whatever they were to me now, and felt a surge of anger so powerful it threatened to choke me. I need some air, I said abruptly, standing up. I can't. I need to think. No one tried to stop me as I walked out of the dining room, through the kitchen, and onto the back porch. The night air was cool against my flushed skin. The familiar backdrop of chirping crickets and rustling leaves a surreal contrast to the earthquake that had just destroyed the foundation of my identity. I wasn't who I thought I was. And my real mother had died bringing me into the world, her voice silenced before she could tell me who I was. I don't know how long I stood on the porch, watching fireflies blink in the darkness of the backyard. Time seemed to have lost all meaning. Eventually, I heard the screen door creak open behind me. Can I join you? Dad or Uncle Nathan? I supposed, asked quietly. I nodded without turning around. He came to stand beside me at the railing, his familiar presence both comforting and strange in this new context. I owe you a more complete explanation, he said after a moment. About Laura, about how all this happened. I'm listening, I said, keeping my eyes fixed on the darkness. He sighed heavily. Laura was always different from the rest of us, more vibrant, more determined to live life on her own terms. Our parents, your grandparents, were good people but rigid in their beliefs. When Laura got pregnant at 16, their main concern was what the church congregation would think, how it would affect the family's standing in the community. I could hear the old pain in his voice, still raw after all these years. They arranged for her to stay with our great-aunt in Minnesota under the pretense of a special school program. The plan was for her to have the baby there, give it up for adoption through a church agency, then return home to finish high school as if nothing had happened. But she didn't want to give up her baby, I said. No. She was adamant about keeping you. She even ran away from our great-aunt's house at 7 months pregnant, trying to get to Daniel at his college in Colorado. The police found her at a bus station in South Dakota and brought her back. I winced, imagining a desperate, pregnant teenager trying to flee across state lines to find her baby's father. After that incident, Laura became compliant on the surface. She stopped arguing, stopped fighting. Our parents thought she'd accepted the situation, but Judy and I knew better. Laura was planning something, we just didn't know what. What was she planning? To take you and disappear after you were born. She'd been saving money from her part-time job, researching places she could go. She had this fantasy that she and Daniel would raise you together somewhere far away. But she never got the chance, I said softly. Dad's voice grew thick with emotion. No. The delivery was difficult. You were breech, and by the time they performed an emergency C-section, Laura had lost a lot of blood. She held you once, named you Amber Dawn. For the life that might have been. Our parents were devastated, Dad continued. They blamed themselves, the situation, even you, though they'd never admit that. They wanted to proceed with the adoption as planned, to place you with a proper family as if Laura had never existed. But you and Mom stepped in. Yes. Brenda and I had been trying for a baby for years without success. When Laura first got pregnant, we'd actually suggested this arrangement, but our parents refused. After Laura died, they were more amenable. They saw it as a way to keep the family intact while still maintaining appearances. So you moved here to Mapleton? Yes. Fresh start. New community where no one knew our history. Then, a few months after we settled here, Brenda discovered she was pregnant with Tyler. The doctors called it a stress response. Sometimes when couples stop actively trying to conceive, it happens naturally. I absorbed this information, thinking about how the timing must have affected my mother's already complicated feelings about me. She finally got pregnant with her own biological child just after agreeing to raise her sister-in-law's baby, I said. That must have been confusing. Dad nodded. It was a difficult time. Brenda was dealing with her own pregnancy while caring for a newborn. I was starting a new job. We were both grieving Laura. Brenda's relationship with you has always been complicated. I think on some level, she feared that if you knew about Laura, you'd reject her completely. That fear only grew as you and she became more distant over the years. I thought about all the times I'd felt Mom's disapproval, her emotional distance. How differently she treated Tyler. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it cast it in a new light. And my biological father? Daniel? Why didn't anyone tell him after Laura died? Dad looked down at his hands. That was primarily Brenda's decision, but I was complicit in it. She argued that telling Daniel would only complicate the situation. He was in college, building his own life. What would be gained by burdening him with a child he never asked for, a tragedy he had no part in? That wasn't your decision to make, I said, anger flaring again. Protecting the family, but we were really just protecting ourselves from difficult conversations and potential pain. The back door opened again, and Tyler stepped out, holding a small wooden box. Sorry to interrupt, he said, but I thought you might want these. He handed me the box. It's Laura's things. Her diaries, letters, a few photos. I found them in the attic last year. I took the box with trembling hands. Thank you. There's more, Tyler said. Mom kept everything in a trunk. Photos, school awards, artwork. Even some of Laura's baby clothes that she'd saved for her own children someday. He glanced at Dad. I think Amber should have all of it. Dad nodded. Of course. It belongs to her. I sat down on one of the porch chairs, carefully opening the wooden box. Inside were several small leather-bound journals, a stack of envelopes tied with blue ribbon, and a handful of photographs. I picked up the top photo. A teenage girl with my eyes and smile looked back at me, her hair longer than I'd ever worn mine, her expression both serious and mischievous. Something inside me shifted, clicked into place. This was my mother. This was where I came from. She was beautiful, I whispered. Just like you, Dad said. I set the photo aside and untied the ribbon around the letters. The top envelope was addressed to Daniel Carson, Colorado State University, the handwriting neat and determined. I slipped out the letter and began to read. Dear Daniel, this isn't what either of us planned. But I already love this little one growing inside me, and I thought you deserved to know. Always, Laura. The letter was dated nearly 29 years ago. A letter that never reached its intended recipient because my mother had intercepted it. Daniel never saw this, I said, my voice hollow. Any of these? No, Dad confirmed. Brenda took them from the mailbox before they could be sent. I flipped through the small stack. 5 letters in all, each addressed to Daniel. Each bearing different dates throughout Laura's pregnancy. What about these? I asked, gesturing to the journals. Laura's diaries, Tyler explained. She kept one before she got pregnant. Then started a new one when she found out about you. The last entry is from the day before you were born. I ran my fingers over the worn leather cover, but couldn't bring myself to open it yet. It felt too intimate, too overwhelming. There's something else, Tyler said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to me. I did some research after I found all this stuff last year. Daniel Carson is alive. He teaches environmental science at the University of Missouri in Columbia. This is his contact information. I stared at the paper, at the neatly printed name, email address, and phone number. My biological father, just 2 states away. A stranger who had no idea I existed. He never remarried after his wife died 5 years ago, Tyler continued. No other children. I didn't contact him, obviously. That should be your decision. Your mother won't like it, Dad said quietly. I'm not asking for her permission, I replied. I'm 28 years old. This is my life, my history, my decision. The screen door opened a 3rd time, and Mom stepped onto the porch. Her eyes were red from crying, her normally perfect posture slightly slumped. She looked at the wooden box in my lap. At the photo of Laura still sitting on top. So now you know, she said, her voice hoarse. Now I know, I agreed. But there's still so much I don't know. So much I should have been told years ago. And then I contact Daniel Carson and tell him he has a daughter. Mom's eyes widened. Amber, you can't. I can, I interrupted firmly. And I will. He deserves to know the truth. Even after all these years. Laura wanted him to know. I want him to know. What if he wants nothing to do with you? Mom asked. What if he rejects you? Then what? Then at least I'll have tried. At least I'll have honored what Laura wanted. Mom looked away, blinking rapidly. And us? What happens to us, to this family? It was the question I'd been asking myself since the revelation at dinner. What did this mean for my relationship with the people I'd called family my entire life? I don't know. I answered honestly. I need time to process all of this. To figure out who I am now that I know where I came from. You're still our daughter, Dad said, his voice breaking. Biology doesn't change the fact that we raised you, loved you, want what's best for you. Part of me will always be your daughter, I acknowledged. But I'm also Laura's daughter. And Daniel's daughter. I need to understand what that means. Mom stepped forward, her movements hesitant. When you said at dinner that nothing you did was ever good enough for me. That wasn't true. You were always more than good enough. Too good, in fact. Too much like her. Laura, I said. Yes. Talented, beautiful, independent. When you were little, it was easier. But as you grew up, as you began to look more like her, act more like her, it terrified me. I was afraid of losing you to her memory, to the perfect mother who never had a chance to disappoint you. So you pushed me away first, I realized. Created distance before I could. Mom nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I handled everything wrong, Amber. The adoption, the secrets. But a step toward understanding. I can't promise what our relationship will look like going forward, I told her. But I'm willing to try to build something honest. No more secrets. No more pretending. And Daniel, she asked, tension evident in her voice. I'm going to contact him. That's non-negotiable. She nodded slowly, resignation in her posture. I suppose after 28 years of secrets, we all have to face the consequences. As the 4 of us stood there on the porch, the family I thought I had and the fragments of the family I might have had, I felt both untethered and strangely grounded. Everything had changed. And yet here I was, still me, still Amber, but with new pieces of myself to discover. I opened the first page of Laura's diary, her handwriting so similar to my own, leaping off the page. Dear baby, I don't know if you're a boy or a girl yet, but I already love you more than I thought possible. Whatever happens, whatever others may say, know that you are wanted. You were loved. You were mine. Your mother, Laura. And I began to read. The next morning, I woke early in my childhood bedroom, Laura's diary scattered across the bed where I'd fallen asleep reading them. Her words had painted a vivid picture of a vibrant, creative young woman facing an impossible situation with courage and determination. She'd written directly to her unborn child, to me, in many entries, sharing her hopes and dreams for our future together. I understood now why Mom had always seemed to hold me at arm's length. I was a living reminder of Laura, the sister-in-law she'd both helped and resented. After a quick shower, I made my way downstairs, following the scent of coffee to the kitchen. Mom stood at the counter, already dressed for the day in her usual crisp slacks and blouse, her back rigid as she measured coffee grounds with precision. Good morning, I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet kitchen. She startled slightly, turning to face me. Amber. Mom's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. And she was remarkable. Funny, thoughtful, determined. She loved art and poetry. She wanted to travel the world someday. Then immediately looked regretful. I'm sorry. That was unfair. I took a sip of coffee, studying her over the rim of my mug. Why did you agree to adopt me? The truth, Mom. She leaned against the counter, her coffee untouched. The simple answer is that we wanted a child. We'd been trying for years, seen specialists, tried treatments. Nothing worked. When Laura got pregnant, it seemed like, I don't know, fate maybe. But you got pregnant with Tyler just a few months later. Yes, the doctors called it a stress response. Innocent in all of this. But as you grew older, as you began to look more like her, act more like her, yes, sometimes I resented what you represented. The hold Laura still had on this family. Even after she was gone. That wasn't my fault, I said quietly. No, it wasn't. She met my eyes directly. And I handled it poorly. Instead of working through my own issues, I created distance between us. By the time I realized what I'd done, the pattern was set. You were pulling away, looking for approval elsewhere. I didn't know how to fix it. The frank admission caught me off guard. Mom had never been one for emotional vulnerability or acknowledging mistakes. Why didn't you tell me the truth? As I got older, why keep up the lie? Fear, she said simply. Fear that you'd reject me completely if you knew I wasn't your biological mother. Fear that you'd idolize Laura and resent us for keeping her from you. Fear that the family we'd built, however imperfect, would shatter. I heard footsteps on the stairs, and Dad appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking tired but relieved to find us talking civilly. Morning, he said cautiously, glancing between us. I was just explaining to Amber why we kept the truth from her, Mom said. Dad poured himself coffee before joining us at the table. I hope you know, Amber, that it wasn't just your mother's decision. I was equally responsible for maintaining the secret. More so, maybe, since Laura was my sister. I read her diaries. I told him. She made you promise to tell me about her someday. To make sure I knew she wanted me, that she didn't choose to leave me. Dad's face crumpled slightly. Yes. It was the last thing she asked of me, and I failed her. Failed you both. Why? I pressed. Why not honor her dying wish? At first, you were too young to understand. Then, as years passed, it became harder to find the right moment. The longer we waited, the more impossible it seemed. And Daniel? Laura's letters make it clear she wanted him involved in my life. Dad and Mom exchanged glances. That was primarily Brenda's decision, Dad said carefully. Don't put this all on me, Mom countered. You agreed it was for the best. You intercepted her letters, I said, addressing Mom directly. You actively prevented him from knowing about me. Why? Because he would have complicated everything. Mom's composure finally cracked. He might have wanted custody. He might have challenged the adoption. At the very least, he would have been a permanent connection to Laura. A reminder of what happened. That wasn't your decision to make, I said, anger rising in my chest. You robbed him of the chance to know his child. You robbed me of the chance to know my biological father. We gave you a stable home, Mom shot back. 2 parents who cared for you, provided for you. Was that so terrible? The problem isn't what you gave me, I replied. It's what you took from me. My identity. My history. My connection to Laura and Daniel. My right to know the truth about where I came from. The back door opened and Tyler walked in, instantly sensing the tension. Whoa. Heavy conversation before coffee. Just continuing last night's revelations, I said. Tyler grabbed a mug and joined us at the table. Did you read the diaries? I nodded. They're incredible. She was incredible. I thought so too, he agreed. The way she stood up to everyone. Insisted on keeping you despite all the pressure. She was brave. She was foolish, Mom interjected. A pregnant teenager with no means of support, no education. No plan beyond love will find a way. That's not bravery, it's naivety. She was both, I said. Young and idealistic, but also determined and loving. She would have found a way to make it work if she'd lived. You can't know that, Mom insisted. Neither can you, I countered. But I do know she wanted me to know my father. Potentially cause him pain and confusion, all to satisfy your curiosity. It's not curiosity, I said. It's my right to know where I came from. And it's his right to know he has a daughter. Brenda, Dad said gently, Amber is an adult. This is her decision to make. Fine. Make your decision. Mom stood abruptly. But don't expect me to approve or participate in this. This excavation of the past. Some things are better left buried. Like Laura. I challenged. Is that why there are no photos of her in this house? No mention of her name? Did you think you could erase her completely? I didn't erase her. I protected this family, including you, from a painful history that would only cause more hurt if brought to light. That wasn't your call to make. I stood now too, my voice rising. You had no right to decide what I could or couldn't handle, what I should or shouldn't know about my own mother. I am your mother. Mom shouted, her face flushed. I changed your diapers. I sat up with you when you had fevers. I drove you to school and helped with homework and attended every dance recital and softball game. I did everything a mother does. Except love me unconditionally, I said. The words flying out before I could stop them. The kitchen fell silent. Mom stared at me, shock and hurt written across her face. That's not fair, Amber, Dad said quietly. Isn't it? I challenged. She's always held me at a distance. Always made me feel like I wasn't quite good enough. Like I was always being measured against some impossible standard. A child who looked more like her every day. Knowing that if you ever found out the truth, you might reject me completely. Being afraid every single day that I wasn't enough. That I could never replace the mother you lost. Her raw honesty stunned me into momentary silence. I never asked you to replace her, I finally said. I just needed you to love me for who I was. I did love you, Mom insisted. I do love you. But I'm human, Amber. I made mistakes. I let my insecurities affect how I parented you. I'm not proud of it, but I can't change the past. No. But we can be honest about it. And we can try to build something different going forward. The tension in the room had shifted, the anger giving way to a painful kind of clarity. For perhaps the first time, Mom and I were seeing each other without the veil of secrets between us. The doorbell rang, interrupting the moment. Dad went to answer it. Dad said diplomatically. Aunt Judy approached me, her eyes kind. Amber, how are you doing with all of this? Processing, I said. I read Laura's diaries last night. She was so much like you. Aunt Judy said, smiling sadly. Or I suppose it's more accurate to say you're like her. The same creative spirit, the same determination. Judy brought something for you, Uncle Frank said. She was quite talented. I took the envelope, touched by the gesture. Thank you. There's something else, Uncle Frank said, his expression serious. Something we need to tell all of you. He glanced at his wife, who nodded encouragingly. After Tyler found those papers in the attic last year, he called us. Asked about Laura, about what really happened. Frank, Mom warned. They deserve the whole truth, Brenda, he said firmly. Especially Amber. What truth? I asked, looking between them. Uncle Frank took a deep breath. When Laura was pregnant with you, she got desperate enough to call his parents. What happened? I asked. His mother answered. Laura identified herself and said she needed to speak with Daniel about something important. The mother said Daniel had told them about that girl from school who wouldn't leave him alone and that they weren't interested in having their son harassed. I felt a chill run through me. So he did know? He rejected her. No, Aunt Judy interjected. That's what we thought at the time, what Laura believed. But years later, I ran into Daniel's sister at a conference. Just like Mom intercepted the letters. It seems that way, Uncle Frank confirmed. More than that, we think she may have been intercepting all of Laura's calls. Daniel may never have known she was trying to reach him at all. I turned to Mom, whose face had gone pale. Did you know about this? No, she said. Which made it easier to justify keeping him in the dark, I concluded. Mom didn't deny it. The point is, Uncle Frank continued, Daniel may not have rejected Laura or you, Amber. He may have been kept in the dark by his own family, just as you were kept in the dark by yours. The revelation landed like a stone in still water, ripples of implications spreading outward. Not one but two families had conspired, separately but effectively, to keep father and daughter apart. I need to find him, I said, more determined than ever. I need to know if he would have wanted me if he'd known. Amber, wait, Mom said, her voice strained. Before you do this, before you append everything, I need you to understand something. If you contact Daniel Carson, if you forge a relationship with him, it will change things between us. It will change this family. It's already changed, I pointed out. The moment I learned the truth, everything changed. I'm not sure I can watch you build a relationship with him, Mom admitted. I'm not sure I'm strong enough for that. The naked vulnerability in her admission caught me off guard. For all her faults, all her mistakes, she was still the woman who had raised me. Who had been the only mother I'd known for 28 years. Are you giving me an ultimatum? I asked quietly. No, Dad interjected before Mom could respond. She's not. We both want you in our lives, Amber, however you choose to move forward. Right, Brenda? Mom looked torn, emotions warring across her face. Finally, she nodded. I'm trying to be honest about my feelings. I'm afraid of losing you to him, to Laura's memory. But I don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past by trying to control your choices. It wasn't quite the unconditional support I might have hoped for, but it was perhaps the most honest Mom had ever been with me. I'm going to contact him, I said firmly. Today. I've waited 28 years to know the truth about where I came from. I won't wait any longer. Then I guess we'll deal with the consequences together, Mom said. Her voice barely above a whisper. I looked around at these people who had been my family my entire life, complicated, flawed, but still mine in some fundamental way, and nodded. Together. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone and the piece of paper Tyler had given me with Daniel Carson's contact information. Before I could second-guess myself, I dialed the number. It rang 3 times before a deep voice answered. Hello. I took a deep breath. Is this Daniel Carson? Yes, who's this? My name is Amber Miller. You don't know me, but I think you knew my biological mother, Laura Mitchell. And I have reason to believe that you're my father. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. The morning after my call to Daniel Carson was surreal. I sat alone in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by Laura's diaries and photos, trying to process the brief but life-changing conversation. I knew Laura, he had said after the initial shock. We dated my senior year, her junior year. But I never knew she was pregnant. I never knew there was a child. His voice had been steady but emotional as I explained what I'd recently discovered, how his mother had intercepted Laura's calls, how my mother had intercepted her letters, how 2 families had conspired separately to keep us apart. I would have wanted to know, he'd said, his voice cracking slightly. I would have wanted to be part of your life. We'd agreed to meet in person, to talk face-to-face about everything that had happened and what it might mean for our future. A cafe in Columbia, Missouri. Unable to finish the sentence. I thought you should have it all. Thank you, I said, already lifting the lid to examine the contents. Sitting on the edge of the bed. Always creating something. You get that from her. I smiled, touched by the simple acknowledgement of my connection to Laura. I'm meeting Daniel on Friday. I told him. In Missouri. Dad nodded. Tyler mentioned you'd made arrangements. How do you feel about it? Nervous. Excited. Terrified. I laughed softly. All of the above, I guess. That's understandable. He said he never knew about me. That he would have wanted to be involved if he'd known. Dad was quiet for a moment. I believe that. The little I knew of him. He seemed like a decent young man. Serious about school, about his future. Laura was crazy about him. Will you tell me about her? I asked. Not just the end, but what she was like growing up. What kind of sister she was to you. Dad smiled, his eyes distant with memory. She was a force of nature. For years younger than me, but always trying to keep up. She could be bossy, but in the best possible way, because she genuinely wanted the people she loved to experience beautiful things. Like you, he added softly. My similarities to my biological mother had been unacknowledged, perhaps even discouraged. Now they were being celebrated, connected to a lineage I was only beginning to understand. Speaking of which, your mother's downstairs making lunch. Will you join us? I hesitated, then nodded. Sure. I'll be down in a minute. After Dad left, I carefully returned Laura's treasures to the box, except for the butterfly bracelet, which I fastened around my wrist. Then I made my way downstairs. Mom was in the kitchen, making sandwiches with the same precise movements she'd applied to every task for as long as I could remember. Tyler sat at the counter, texting someone, probably his girlfriend Katie, who had tactfully made herself scarce during our family drama. Amber, Mom acknowledged as I entered. Turkey or ham? Turkey, please, I said, sliding onto a stool beside Tyler. Thanks. Situation with Daniel? Mom asked, not looking up from her task. I'm meeting him on Friday, I said. In Missouri. I see. Her movements faltered slightly before resuming their precision. Her expression carefully neutral. What are you hoping to get from this meeting? The question could have been confrontational, but her tone was genuinely inquiring, perhaps even concerned. Answers, I said honestly. A connection to the other half of where I came from. Maybe. The beginning of some kind of relationship, if that's what we both want. Mom finally looked up. For what it's worth, I hope it goes well for you. The simple statement, free of qualifications or conditions, was perhaps the most supportive thing Mom had said to me in years. I felt a lump form in my throat. Thank you, I managed. We ate lunch in a strange, but not uncomfortable silence, each lost in our own thoughts. Afterward, Tyler suggested a walk downtown for old time's sake, and I agreed, grateful for the chance to clear my head. As we strolled down Maple Street, past the shops and cafes that had formed the backdrop of our childhood, Tyler nudged my shoulder gently. So, big sister, or I guess I should say cousin, how are you really doing with all this? Still the same Amber who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my college applications and threatened to beat up Tommy Wilson when he stole my lunch money in 3rd grade. I'd forgotten about Tommy Wilson, I smiled. What a little jerk. My point is, finding out about Laura and Daniel doesn't change who you are. It just adds more context to your story. I considered his words, appreciating his perspective. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise, he grinned. You were just too busy being the responsible older sibling to notice. It wasn't your burden to bear. Still, you deserve to know the truth. Everyone did. And now we do, I said. For better or worse. Back at the house, I learned that she loved thunderstorms and hated Brussels sprouts. That she'd wanted to visit Paris and paint the Seine. My stomach in knots the entire way. We'd agreed to meet at a quiet cafe near campus, neutral territory for this most unusual of reunions. How does one greet a biological father they're meeting for the first time at 28? He solved the dilemma by offering his hand, then changing his mind and opening his arms for a brief, awkward embrace. Thank you for coming, he said as we sat across from each other. I've been thinking about nothing else since your call. Me too, I admitted. You look so much like her, he said softly. Like Laura. I recognized you the moment you walked in. The simple observation brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I've been hearing that a lot lately. We ordered coffee. And then Daniel pulled out an old photo from his wallet, him and Laura at what must have been a high school dance, both looking impossibly young and happy. I kept this, he said. All these years. She was my first love, you know. We had plans to go to college together, but my parents insisted I attend their alma mater in Colorado. We tried the long-distance thing for a while, but it was hard. The phone calls became less frequent, the letters fewer. Eventually, they stopped altogether. Because her letters were being intercepted, I said. And your mother was screening her calls. He nodded, his expression pained. My mother was protective, class-conscious. Laura's family didn't have the pedigree mine did, at least in my mother's eyes. When I confronted her after your call, she finally admitted to discouraging Laura, though she still maintains she never knew about a pregnancy. Would it have mattered? If you had known about me? Absolutely, he said without hesitation. I would have done whatever it took to be part of your life. To support Laura. He leaned forward, his eyes intent on mine. I need you to believe that. Amber. I'm not the kind of man who would abandon his child. And somehow I did believe him. Perhaps it was the sincerity in his voice, or the family resemblance staring back at me. Or simply the need to believe that half of my genetic heritage wasn't a dead end. Tell me about your life, he said. Everything. I've missed 28 years, and I want to know it all. So I told him about growing up in Mapleton, my love of art and marketing, my career in San Francisco. I told him about Dad's encouragement and Mom's distance, his quiet life of teaching and writing. I always wanted children, he said. Carol and I tried for years, but it never happened. And all that time, I had a daughter I never knew about. He shook his head, still processing the magnitude of what had been kept from him. Hours passed as we talked, each hesitant question leading to another, then another. The cautious distance between us gradually giving way to something warmer, more familiar. What happens now, he finally asked. I don't want to overstep, but I'd like to be part of your life. If you're open to that. I'd like that too, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. And your family, the Millers? How do they feel about all this? It's complicated, I admitted. Dad, Nathan, has been supportive. Tyler too. Mom is trying. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. This can't be easy for any of them. Especially your mother. His empathy for the woman who had helped keep us apart touched me. No, it's not. But we're working through it. By the time we parted, exchanging phone numbers and promises to stay in touch, something had shifted inside me. I wasn't just Amber Miller anymore, the adopted daughter of Nathan and Brenda. I was also Laura Mitchell's daughter, Daniel Carson's daughter. My identity had expanded, become more complex, but somehow more complete. Back in Mapleton for my final night before returning to San Francisco, I found Mom alone in the kitchen, nursing a cup of tea. How did it go? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. Well, I said, sliding into the chair across from her. He's a good person. Kind. Thoughtful. He would have wanted to know me if he'd had the chance. Mom nodded, her eyes fixed on her cup. I'm glad for you. Mom, I said gently, meeting Daniel doesn't erase you from my life. It doesn't change the fact that you raised me, that you're the mother I've known my whole life. She looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. But it changes things between us. How could it not? Yes, I agreed. But maybe that's not entirely bad. Maybe we needed a change. A chance to build something more honest, more open. I don't know if I know how to do that. She admitted. Me neither, I said. But I'm willing to try if you are. She reached across the table and, for the first time in years, took my hand in hers. I'm willing to try. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. The hurt was still too fresh, the betrayal too profound. But it was a beginning, a tentative step toward something new. 6 months later, I stood in my apartment in San Francisco, making final preparations for a dinner party that would have seemed impossible half a year earlier. Mom and Dad were flying in from Iowa. The past 6 months had been a journey of redefinition and rebuilding. Weekly phone calls with Daniel had evolved into regular visits and a growing bond that felt both new and somehow familiar. Our conversations were more honest now, sometimes painfully so, but always moving toward greater understanding. She was making an effort to know me as I was, not as a reflection of Laura or an extension of herself. The doorbell rang, and I took a deep breath before answering. Mom and Dad stood in the hallway, travel-weary but smiling. Welcome to San Francisco, I said, stepping back to let them in. It's good to be here, Dad said, giving me a warm hug. Mom embraced me next, her hug more tentative but genuine. The flight was smooth, she offered. And the city looks beautiful from the air. Daniel's flight gets in at 6, I said, watching her carefully. Tyler and Katie should be here any minute. Mom nodded, only a slight tightening around her eyes betraying her nervousness. I've been practicing what to say to him. Just be yourself, I advised, surprising us both with the suggestion. She laughed softly. That hasn't always worked out so well in the past. We're all learning, I reminded her. That's what this weekend is about. Later that evening, as we all gathered around my dining table, the family that raised me and the father I'd only just found, I felt a sense of completion I'd never expected to experience. The wounds weren't all healed. The relationship still tender in places, but we were together, facing the truth instead of hiding from it. "I'd like to propose a toast," Daniel said, raising his glass. "To Laura, whose love for her daughter set all of this in motion. And to all of us, finding our way toward a new kind of family." To Laura, everyone echoed, even Mom, her voice soft but steady. As we ate and talked and gradually relaxed into this new configuration of family, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From a secret kept for 28 years to the explosive dinner where truth finally broke free. From leave to not until I hear the truth I've been denied my entire life. The path forward wouldn't always be smooth. There would be difficult conversations, uncomfortable moments, old hurts that might never fully heal. But there would also be honesty, understanding, and the chance to know myself completely for the first time. In the end, that was worth fighting for, worth staying for, worth building a new kind of family around. So, where are you watching from today? Has my story of family secrets and painful truths resonated with your own experiences? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if my journey has touched you in any way, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of healing and transformation. Remember, it's never too late to seek your truth, to redefine family on your own terms, to begin again with honesty as your foundation. Thank you for listening, and I wish you courage on your own journey of discovery.